Moisture is back. We're coming into spring, and as some of you may know, back on Saturday, March 13th, we had a tornado outbreak in the Texas Panhandle. Now, we are not going to cover the photography. You can go straight to YouTube and check some of this out. But what we're going to focus on here is how it evolved. All right, we're going to take a little trip back in time to Saturday morning about 10 a.m. So what do we see here on this surface plot? Where would you go if you were going to go out to look at storms? Well, what we see here is some cool air up in the I-40 corridor, 50s up in that region. And down to the south, we've got some moisture. Mid-60s dew points making its way up to Abilene and Mineral Wells. The dry line is pretty far out to the west, somewhere in this area right here. Out in southeast New Mexico, dew points were almost all the way up to 60 degrees. So let's draw those fronts. I seem to be getting something like this, and I think there may be a low pressure area right in here. Obviously, this is not a detailed analysis. We're not going to dig too much into this data. But some key points, the moisture axis, located right through here, impinging on the warm front right around Jayton. We can see overall there's kind of a cyclonic circulation out there in eastern New Mexico, and that would set the stage for what would happen later. You can see the triple point right there, the so-called warm front right in this region right there, and of course a dry line off to the west. Let's check out the satellite. So we started out with some very extensive high cloud early in the morning. This is how things looked about 17Z, about 11 in the morning, and we're going to focus on this line right there. That's going to correspond to the dry line. Of course, we know that the fronts are located somewhat like that. So what we see as we go through the morning hours is a line of thunderstorms starting to develop out there in the Clovis area. Now keep in mind Lubbock is located right there, Amarillo up to the north there. And these are the cells that are coming together. Now you're not going to go out there and start looking at storms, because if you actually drove out there to Childress, you would find these storms rapidly moving off to the east. So you'd be left in the dust there. However, these storms continued to develop during the early afternoon. This is going to be about 1 p.m. There they are. They're crossing over the state line into Texas. And then this is how things looked about 2 p.m. So which of these cells would you go after? Well, there's stuff up to the north near Vega, stuff further down south near Littlefield, and further down the line, some embryonic storms out around Hobbs. Well, let's back things up a little bit and check out that cluster as it crosses the state line. So here we have the Amarillo radar. There's those cells right there near Clovis. Obviously, nothing too interesting. Some clusters up here to the north. Those have severe thunderstorm warnings on them. However, those do look kind of grungy also. So let's run this forward and see how things evolve. So that's going to be 1:02 p.m. And then we get up to about 1:30. The cells are moving north into Muleshoe and Littlefield, not developing any significant severe structure. The stuff further north, yeah, you can see some tendency towards, these look like kind of like mini supercells. Now, that to me would probably be a good indicator of what may be coming later in the day. The storm velocity looks like this. Yep, they're developing some circulation, nothing too serious, but it is getting there. So it's just before 2 o'clock. If you're out there, maybe along the interstate between Amarillo and Lubbock, which cell are you going to go after? Are you going to go up to this cluster here that has some rotation? What about these cells down here? Are they going to do anything? And what about that one near Littlefield? See, to me, this is the really interesting stuff. People like to focus exclusively on the hook echo and the tornado circulation, but I like to kind of pick things apart when the event is coming together. Well, starting out at 2 p.m. there, still nothing too serious going on just yet. But if we roll this forward, we get a severe thunderstorm warning out of this cell here east of Muleshoe. And that moves northward and starting to develop a little bit of reflectivity gradient on the south side there. The circulations, yeah, it's pulling together a little bit of something there, just some weak convergence coming together. And then we have this other cell developing near Littlefield. So which one would you go after? I mean, these have small hooks on them. So we go forward to 230, and then there's 232, 236, and this one still looks like a cluster. Probably some hail and wind in that, but nothing too serious. Let's check out the storm relative velocity. Yeah, it's still looking not too organized, but there are some strong velocities developing. So from a ground relative perspective, we're getting about 60 knots inbound. That is up at about 4,000 feet, but it is developing some, what looks like some inflow. So we bring this forward to 242, 245. It is starting to develop some structure there. The same on the southern cell. And now we're starting to get what looks like a little bit of hook activity. The storm relative velocity is now starting to show some high magnitudes. That looks like about 30 out and 48 in, so that's about 70 knots of broad scale rotation. And up in the higher tilts, you can see some high reflectivities up there at about 15,000 to 20,000 feet. So it is lofting some hailstones for sure. And the tops, those are going to be up there at about 35,000 feet. So we've got the tornado warning on that already. Nothing on the one down to the south. Now the 3 p.m. hour is when it really began to organize. Running that forward, you can see it moving up towards the Happy area, just west of town. And you can watch the circulation come together on the storm relative velocity. There it is. Now we're starting to get the tornadic signature. And that's showing up about 3 miles northwest of Happy. And that is about 140 knots of shear. So that's almost certainly going to have a tornado on the ground. And then we roll that forward. You can see that circulation move up to the north. And notice this right here. That's going to be a band of strong inflow. And that moves on up to the northeast while the other circulation, the other tornado on the ground, moves up across the interstate. And that other band that we talked about, there it is, coming together off to the east of the circulation, and we end up with a new tornado up to the northeast. That's that cyclic circulation that is associated with stronger supercells. The shear on this is about 110 knots at this time, gate to gate, and that's very tight circulation. And at this point, it's crossing the Palo Duro Canyon area. And on the reflectivity, looking like that, about 4 p.m. Meanwhile, the other cell to the south, that thing has a tornado warning on it also. It is coming together. However, at this point, it's still showing kind of a broad circulation. As we move forward through the 4 p.m. hour, let me get rid of all these warnings. This is the southern cell right here, and you can see as it crosses the county line, There was a point here where the circulation really tightened up, and that's when we had a tornado warning down in that region. But up to the north, this thing is really going. You can see that tight circulation, the radar located to the north, and at this point, it is now crossing the Red River, emerging on the other side and approaching 287. The velocities, 80 knots outbound and 60 inbound, so that's going to be 140 knots a shear, and the sail looking like that right there. Obviously, the hook is all curled up, and the spectrum width is showing that debris cloud right there. So if you want to look at Google Maps or Roads of Texas, you can look at that street pattern and compare that to the debris and find out exactly where that track was. Anyway, that continued moving up to the northeast, and then as it approached 287, that circulation began to weaken and broaden. So by the end of the 4 p.m. hour, you can see it starting to fall apart there as it reaches 287. And I like to think that that's a potential catastrophe that was avoided. And yeah, by that time, approaching the interstate, it falls apart, and that's what the storm looks like right there. Meanwhile, the southern storm, that thing's really cranking along, heading up towards Claude, and those purple reflectivities are indicative of some pretty good hail coming down. So let's recap that. At the start of the 4 p.m. hour, it looked like this. 2 storms, and roll that forward. You can see those progress up to the northeast. And I kind of wonder if maybe that northern cell was just ingesting a whole lot of inflow from the south, and maybe that eventually just kind of overwhelmed it. I mean, it's certainly producing quite a precipitation field, as we can tell by that high reflectivity value. Then for the remains of that old storm from the Palo Duro Canyon area, after 5 p.m., that moved up towards the town of Groom. And you can see that spiral pattern right there, the storm relative velocity, showing some convergence developing once again, and that produced a small tornado that moved through Groom. There's one more look at that. Meanwhile, down to the south, there's our southern storm, and you can see that start organizing right around 5:10 p.m. as it approaches the town of Clarendon to the northeast. So distinct hooks showing up right there, and you can watch that move towards the west side of town. It's caught briefly in that beam blockage pattern right there, but that's it, emerging into the west side of Clarendon, and a pretty good hook showing. The storm relative velocity shows a cyclonic convergence pattern, strengthening quite a bit, and as it moves towards Clarendon, you can see that tighten up. Now briefly, you can pick out 2 signatures right here. That's going to be a brief tornado that moved into far west Clarendon, the main circulation located right there. And that's it moving into the Clarendon area around 5:51 p.m., producing an EF2 tornado. So that's the quick and dirty on the Panhandle storm, and I don't think a whole lot went on to the south. And there's the storm reports in digital atmospheres showing the tornado cluster south of Amarillo. And it looks like some of the heavier hail reports were actually up to the north around Mobeetie, and looks like just north of Shamrock. There's a look at the surface map for this afternoon. So bringing this all the way up to Tuesday, well, we got another storm system coming out of the southern Rockies. However, this time we're involving a little bit less moisture. You can see the dry line managed to push all the way out east into western Oklahoma and almost to Abilene. So the Panhandle's left high and dry back behind that dry line. The moist axis, that's flowing up from the Gulf right around Houston and up into the southern Oklahoma area. Out in the central Rockies, looks like an occlusion out there in Utah. And the pattern out in Georgia, Alabama has not really changed very much, but up to the north it looks like we have a separate low-pressure system making a pass up to the north, and you can see that little wedge there of temperatures near 70. Let's take a closer look at Texas and see what's going on. Yep, that's our system right there. The dry punch coming into western Oklahoma, not much moisture in the lower levels in West Texas and the panhandles, and then out to the east, the moisture is still a little bit scarce with 50s and very low 60s dew points. And out behind the cold front, we've got dust blowing out in Las Cruces, El Paso, Guadalupe Peak, and Alamogordo. Yeah, look at that. And we can see that on the satellite. There it is, dust storm underway, and that's coming from those playas there. Looks like southwest of Ciudad Juarez. Huge plume of dust coming all the way up towards Roswell, Hobbs, and Carlsbad. And that's going to probably go into West Texas later on this evening. And look at that, White Sands has got a dust plume of its own. Up to the north, a lot of forced convection. Looks very vigorous there south of Albuquerque. And this is partly due to strong upper-level dynamics and very cool conditions in the mid-levels. And out to the east, you can see the lack of moisture in Texas. Let's move over a little bit further. And this is looking at that paltry moisture field, northwest Texas, seeing very little in the way of clouds. And most of the clouds that we are seeing are high cirrus, like you saw on the opening clip. One little turkey tower going up there near Guthrie, Texas. And even the caprock itself, not of much help. There's a close look at that windstorm. El Paso reporting 23 gusting to 35 with 6 miles and blowing dust. Alamogordo gusting up to 36 knots. And Roswell 40 gusting to 53 with 1 mile in dust. It says it's haze, but we all know what the story is on that. And the traffic camera is not showing too much. After all, this is a dust storm, not a sandstorm. Yeah, that one looks pretty bad. That's US 62 near mile marker 130. Well, here's what it looks like on the high-resolution rapid refresh. That's going to be the cold front spilling into eastern New Mexico with the payload of dust and all that debris. And that's going to continue moving eastward. I mean, it should settle down overnight, but the cold air will be making its way eastward. Looks like by midnight that should be moving into the San Angelo area, producing a few storms in that region. The warm front will be lifting north into Kansas and Missouri, and north of that boundary some wraparound forced precip in southwestern Kansas. Then going into the rest of tonight, little MCS gets going around Brownwood, down towards Llano, Waco, and just northwest of Austin. And then I'll move eastward into East Texas during the early morning hours, and you can see up there in the northern panhandle, some snow gets going. SPC is looking for an enhanced risk of severe weather in northwestern Oklahoma with slight risk all the way down the plains. So their concern are the strong dynamics spilling eastward into the panhandles and western Oklahoma. It looks like most of that emerges just after dark, so we're talking about 9 to 10 p.m. in that region, but I would expect certainly some of those storms to be kind of vigorous. And the supercell composite looking like this. You can really make out some of these boundaries. There's the northern part of the cold front. That's the origin coming from Colorado and Kansas. And further to the south, we can pick out the dry line. And it looks like we do get a little bit of a surge of moisture coming up through Childress. So that'll be something to watch later on. You can see that impinges on the boundary about 10 p.m. all the way back towards Woodward. and then forcing further south down the dry line. And the cold front, of course, will overrun that dry line very quickly. And then into the overnight hours, the severe risk will diminish as we get into minimum heating, but we're looking for some potential for tomorrow in the Mississippi River Basin. And let me bring up that graphic. There you can see things moving eastward overnight. Then we get the heating and the organization of the new cells along that cold front. And we're looking for a severe risk there in Arkansas down towards Monroe, Louisiana, the Interstate 20 corridor. And then as we get into the evening hours, that's going to cross over to Memphis and northern Mississippi. And with that, we're going to have some severe potential. Let me just bring up a quick skew-t in that area. We did this back on Friday, I think. Looking like this here again, tornado risk. Slightly capped, good moisture. And you can see that the STP is picked up to about maybe 1 to 2. So that's getting into the lower ranges of EF tornado values. But we'll try to do an early video tomorrow to look at this in more detail. I'll try to produce that about noon, and hopefully we'll get that uploaded by about 2 to 3 if everything works out okay. And that's about all I have for this edition of Forecast Lab. I want to thank you for your support. Thanks to our new patrons, Thomas Fortner, Stephen Kondrak, and Kelly Miller. Welcome to the family, and rest assured that your contributions are helping to keep this program moving forward. Okay, until tomorrow, hope you have a great Monday evening, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.